Welcome to the Business of Business IT. I'm Bruce Guptill. Today we have a return guest. Bill Kirwin is Chief Researcher for A3E Research and Advisory Services, or ARAS. ARAS is going to be delivering some very interesting new insights on next-gen tech disruption in the music, audio, and entertainment industries. And it's going to be happening July 7th through 10th at the first ever virtual summit from the National Association of Music Manufacturers, or NAMM. Full disclosure, I have been involved with ARIS Research, and I will be co-presenting with Bill at the virtual summit in July. Bill, I want to start by refreshing people's knowledge about what ARIS is, and then we'll dive into what you're calling the next big three disruptors in audio, music, and entertainment, and how these can relate to changes that we're seeing in technology and business in other markets as well.
Well, thanks, Bruce. Good to see you again. A little introduction about ARIS. We are focused on the audio and entertainment industries and how high technology and advancing and emerging technologies are going to impact that industry going into the future. So we're looking at artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. There's a dozen emerging technologies that are various stages of maturity right now, but are dramatically impacting the industry for audio recording and all of its uses in the entertainment industry and gaming, artificial intelligence applications and robotics. So it's a fascinating set of technologies, and I think we're very unique in applying those to the audio and entertainment industries.
So the next big three, Bill, disruptors in advanced audio technology and markets. Now, before we kick everything off, this says ERIS Forecasts. And is that a format that ERIS is using now to look at what's coming and look at ways to explain how it's going to disrupt things?
Yeah, so that's part of an acronym that we've put together called F squared. It's our findings and forecasts. So this presentation is specifically about our forecasts. The earlier presentation that we'll be giving next week is regarding our findings of a recent survey that we did as far as the impact of these technologies on the industry and on individual businesses.
All right, terrific. Thank you. So the first of the next big three, blockchain, obviously a very hot topic in any industry right now. But why don't you give us some of the high points as to why blockchain is considered one of the next big three disruptors for audio, entertainment, music, and so on, and what some of the disruptions are going to be. And then we can share what the timelines look like.
Absolutely. And we'll see where it is on a figure that we've put together called the Heiress Wave. But right now, the blockchain technologies are really in the emerging and early adoption phases. Essentially, blockchain is a general distributed ledger system for accounting in a trusted automated accounting framework that allows things like payments and production and distribution, intellectual properties rights management to be done without all of the intricacies that we are facing today. So the music and entertainment industry is a very complex collection of payment systems and intellectual property management issues. Entertainment today is probably 10 times more complex than it was 10 years ago, simply because a lot of performing artists today are sharing multiple intellectual property rights with each other, with past performers and future collaborators. So all of this stuff typically had been documented in paper contracts, handshake agreements in the past, and that's impossible to maintain. So we see this as inevitable capability for the A&E industry going forward, and we're just the very beginning of it today.
Well, speaking of where we are today versus where we are over the course of the next few years, now you mentioned a moment ago the ERIS Wave, and I've got that up on the screen now. It looks like three positions over the course of time, and we have the four stages that you've started to mention: emerging, adopting, adapting, and optimizing. So if you could give us a sense of how the wave works and what it means for blockchain as we see it on the screen here.
Absolutely. So the wave gauges the relative market interest in a particular technology over time. a lot of these new technologies are heavily promoted early on. There's a lot of promise. And as that level of interest takes hold, we see the wave rising. The blue line there is the wave. And approaching a point where there's a point of inflection in the marketplace, perhaps 30-40% adoption, where we can call this a solid technology that's in use in the marketplace. Blockchain right now is at the early end of that stage. We have three different metrics here that we have identified. The first one is the position in 4Q19 when we took our initial survey, and that is the light orange block on the chart. Okay, that was 6 months ago, and we can see that it's adjusted slightly going on up the emerging wave of market interest, right? There are companies that are adopting this, and there are companies that are implementing it, but they haven't reached that critical mass yet as a technology that has been codified into the industry. It's getting there. It's moving in the right direction. We project that by year-end 2022, it's going to be at the other end of that wave. We can see a fairly rapid progression of this over the next few years as it moves from the emerging to the adopting and adapting stages. And we believe that that is because of the sense of urgency that's created in the marketplace with today's very antiquated methods of keeping track of all this stuff.
Well, as you mentioned, a lot of it is still paper-based, store and forward, single document-based. It gets larger and larger and more complex over time.
Some of it's written on the back of napkins.
Probably a lot. And the key to the wave here is that as technologies get more widely adopted, that's when they become more adaptable as new generations of capabilities become available and more technologies of other types come to bear on them. And so once you get from that adopting stage into the adapting stage, that's when we not only start to really spread out across industries, but that's what's going to get us closer to optimization over time. Am I reading that right?
That's correct. And adaptation also means that we'll see an ecosystem of vendors that work together with each other to provide full spectrum of capabilities for the products. One of the attributes of virtually all of these technologies is that essentially they become a platform, right? And a platform is a capability that will attract other vendors and other customers and other use cases that will then propel it to greater significance in the marketplace.
Now, on each of these that we're looking at, you have what you're calling a vendor watch. Relatively simple, I think, to understand. These are the vendors that ARAS is not only watching, but these are at least some of the vendors that ARAS expects to be disruptive and developmental within blockchain.
Absolutely. So these are the key players that we see out in the marketplace today. This list is subject to change. Some may fall off, some may be added on. But these are the vendors that we will be doing deep dives in, and that'll just give us more and more intelligence as we start to dive deeper into these capabilities. Ultimately, what we'll be doing would be putting the vendor watch onto this timeline so that we can say, okay, their vendor A is in the emerging stages, and vendor B might be in the adapting and optimizing stage. And ultimately, when you reach the point of that wave on the right-hand side, you're up for disintermediation, new technologies are going to be coming in, and you become a legacy vendor. This can become very messy because this curve is subject to changing in its amplitude, its frequency. And each of these vendors might have a capability that is on a much more compressed wave that may not even be exactly shaped like this.
Let's move on to our next big disruptor over the coming years, artificial intelligence, AI. Very open to interpretation still. What actually constitutes AI, right?
So there's no such thing as AI. There are 24 or so technologies. I actually did I took a survey right before we spoke today, and the survey listed all of the different kinds of AIs that are out there. Smart end devices to neural lingual processing, Today, things like machine learning is probably the most widely recognized. And in business, RPA tools and chatbots and so forth are examples of what AI are doing out in the marketplace today. And not only is AI fundamental technology, but it's also very heavily in the application side of things. And there are millions and millions of specific problems that these technologies can be applied to. So AI is very much a large basket of technologies that will need to be individually analyzed going forward.
And because of that, that's why we have multiple modes of disruption, on the bottom of this list. It looks like we've got AI can be expected to automate things, which by itself is a big disruptor in almost any business. It can be expected to accelerate things. I'm assuming the change, the automation, not only how things are done, but what gets done and by whom. But we also note that there's a bullet that says security compromise. Are there any specific concerns about how AI or the AI technologies are going to help compromise security? Or is it more of a general concern at this point?
It's going to work on both sides of the street. Hacking is going to employ AI capabilities in all of its endeavors. And at the other side of it, the security professionals are going to be using AI to identify these things. And just as the problems that blockchain are solving, AI is solving similar problems based on the level of complexity. Security in today's electronic world is so complex that it either could take hiring thousands and thousands of people, or perhaps doing some automation with AI to identify problems as they are occurring and just automatically take care of them.
So right now, as with blockchain, we've moved from emerging, looks like we're moving more toward adoption, but not quite yet.
That's right. It hasn't gone over the top of the wave yet. But compared to the blockchain progress we've seen in the last 6 months, which again is a very short period of time, but significant progress has been made. So this is accelerating faster than blockchain. I think 2 reasons. One is that there are so many technologies in the AI basket that some of them are moving quicker than others and essentially moving the entire basket forward a little bit quicker than on the blockchain side. What we have in this collection of vendors is really an ecosystem. So there are platform vendors in here that have made major investments in establishing AI capabilities. Many of these were established as loss leaders for 5 years or so. So the companies with deep pockets that have been able to make the investments in this. Amazon obviously is a huge player in artificial intelligence and has created its own ecosystem of capabilities that some of the other vendors on this list have then leveraged to say, okay, we're going to take this capability and apply it to this specific problem or this new capability that we want to create, right? So there are vendors here that use Amazon and Google and Microsoft and IBM to be the foundation of the applications that they're delivering. This basket not only has lots of players, but it has different layers from infrastructure on through advanced applications.
Let's go to our third and final big disruptor, and that's 5G networking.
We've got this classified still as early emerging, even though there is so much marketplace hype and vendors that are claiming 5G capabilities, and they're showing their maps of the availability of the technology and so forth. But quite honestly, it's still in the rollout phases, and it's going to take a couple of years. And particularly in North America, it's going slower than it has in other parts of the world. And we'll also see that there may be some issues with the current pandemic that we're in. So there's some uncertainty as to exactly how quickly this is going to roll out. But we think that by year end 22, we're going to be about 3/4 of the way there, and it's going to be sort of a finished product. It'll be in the 70-80% rolled out phase.
One of the things that you and I have talked about with respect to 5G and platforms and all the services that go along with this is that what 5G will allow us and devices to do is be one with the cloud. You will be assimilated for those Star Trek fans out there. And what that means is there will be less communicating to and from cloud-based capabilities, platforms, and services. And it'll be more like, as we say in the bullet here, ubiquitous personal and technological interaction. That would seem to be a major disruptor in any market, but especially in a marketplace that relies on the technology to exist.
My personal projection is that by 2025, people consider themselves to be a thing on the internet, connected to all of the things that are happening within that field of influence of 25 to 30 feet or 40 feet around you, right? Expanding out like layers on an onion to encompass the entire interconnected world.
Bill, why don't you walk us through where things are? We're already between emerging and adopting when it comes to 5G, but we still have a long way to go.
Absolutely. And a lot of it is going to depend on applications emerging, right? 5G is an infrastructure. You need to have the application functionality. And it's going to be a very complex level of integration. So we see that downside of this wave is going to be a very complex implementation period.
Mm-hmm.
However, we see that this is going to rapidly accelerate and going through the adapting and adopting phases. By 2023, we're going to be in the optimizing phases of these things. We're managing the costs and managing the capabilities of these things will all be in the maturing phases. And given that 6G is probably going to be in the second half of this decade, and that'll be another wave.
Do we see more disruptive vendors emerging as we go through the adoption and toward the adaptation phase?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the list of vendors will change fairly dramatically as we focus on the applicability rather than the basic capabilities of 5G.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of those players have yet to be identified.
Bill, thank you very much for being with us today. As always, very interesting, entertaining, and looking forward to our next call.
Bruce, it's been a pleasure, and we'll talk to you soon.